This entire military is one cohesive, dedicated force. And the threats to our nations, they don't sleep. They're watching our every move. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. They may be watching this right now. Our military should not be mistaken for a cable news gabfest show. We don't care what you look like. We don't care who you voted for, who you worship, what you worship, who you love. It doesn't matter if your dad left you millions when he died or if you knew who your father was. We have been honed into a machine of lethal moving parts that you would be wise to avoid if you know what's good for you. We will not be intimidated. We will not back down. We don't want war. But if you want war with the United States of America, there's one thing I can promise you, so help me God. Someone else will raise your sons and daughters.
Make it clear that the views expressed by our host are not considered the official stance of NBR views. Remember, this is all about having fun and enjoying the ride.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Exciting news. MBR is now available on Roku and Amazon Fire Stick. Don't miss out on our amazing content. Simply search for MB Radio on your Roku or Amazon Fire Stick to start enjoying a world of entertainment at your fingertips. Tune in to MBR and experience a whole new level of radio experience. Whether you're into music, news, or talk shows, we've got something for everyone. Download the MB Radio app now and elevate your listening experience with MBR.
Good knowing exactly where to go with the football.
All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping teach them how to podcast, and most importantly, letting their voices be heard. So, I know I had a little bit of some technical issues and whatnot last week, but we are back, and hopefully those are going to be far long and far removed and whatnot. But nonetheless, we have had some fantastic college football all the way up in this point. We actually have our national championship is set up, ready to go between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, the 7th and 8th seeds. So before I get into both of those games, I do want to point out something real quick that I feel a lot of people have tried to diminish, and they try to on the fact they don't like the 12-team college football playoff system. And to me, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's, oh, well, this is what was wrong. Well, if you go off of the old system, Georgia would still be in it, Oregon would still be in it potentially, and those would be our top two seeds. And obviously, as we saw, do they really deserve to be in there? No, because Georgia ended up losing to a better Penn State team. Oregon ended up getting, absolutely destroyed by Ohio State. So this shows that there are good teams that were worthy of being in, even though everybody wants to talk about that Indiana didn't deserve to be in, SMU didn't deserve to be in. Some people would probably argue that Arizona State didn't deserve to be in. They probably argue Clemson didn't had they not won the ACC. And that's mainly people that wanted to argue that Alabama, that Ole Miss and South Carolina deserved to be in because they were 3 lost teams and they were quote unquote better. They had better strengths of schedules, yada, 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 whatever the case may be. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it already looks like this played out exactly how it should have. Now, Are there things that they could do to tweak as far as, yeah, they could probably reseed teams after the first round and whatnot? 100%, because should Oregon have had to play the winner of Tennessee and Ohio State? No, but it did end up working out that they ended up facing the lowest ranking seed and they ended up getting beat for it. So overall, everything worked out the way it was supposed to, quite coincidentally. But nonetheless, people just want to complain a lot of times. And I really don't get the why behind the fact that they want to complain about it. But nonetheless, though, let's get into the two matchups that we had. So the first one, we had Penn State versus Notre Dame. This was pretty much a back and forth all game. Halftime, it was 10-3 with Penn State up. And initially, when I first watched this, because Riley Leonard went down, Steve Angeli comes in, ends up leading him on a really good drive overall. And for me, when I was first watching, I was like, okay, well, Riley Leonard's down. Now Notre Dame has to move from a mobile quarterback that a lot of people don't really expect to kind of sit back in the pocket and, pick a defense apart and whatnot. They're more used to being a runner. They're more used to Notre Dame having to use a strong run game and whatnot to, okay, now they have kind of a more of a, traditional pocket passing quarterback in Steve Angeli. But he managed to go 6 of 7, 44 yards, set him up to at least be able to go into the field goal and whatnot to at least get Notre Dame on the board. And then it seemed like from that point moving forward, it was all Notre Dame with their ability to be able to move the ball. And overall, this was kind of a bad performance on kind of both teams' parts. It did end up actually being a defensive battle, kind of like what I thought it would be. I didn't think that Notre Dame would potentially be able to compete with that Penn State offense, but the thing that had made me worried about Penn State all this time throughout the entire playoffs was their defense was able to carry them, and their defense was able to make up for a lot of the shortcomings that the offense had. Now, the offense would do just enough to be able to make it work. But again, it was one of those, this is a very anemic offense. They're not doing anything particularly well. Penn State doesn't run the ball like crazy. They don't throw the ball like crazy. There's a lot of thoughts and rumors out there that Drew Aller is potentially going to be probably one of the top quarterbacks in the draft next year. Now, as we found out, Carson Beck is going to be at Miami for another year. He ended up taking, I think, a $6 million deal from the Hurricanes, but also $10 million in brand deals and whatnot through, I think, 4 or 5 different big brands. So Carson Beck will probably be out there. I think the jury is still out on whether or not Quinn Ewers will stay. I know he announced that he's going to go to the draft and he's going to go in the NFL next year. I do think he wants to potentially work on some of that stock that he has, though, because I think this game against Ohio State really showed where Quinn Ewers kind of struggles as a pocket passer. And it seems like ever since he got hurt kind of earlier in the season and Arch Manning had to step in, this is a totally different Quinn Ewers than what we're used to seeing. But nonetheless, though, back to Notre Dame and Penn State with Drew Aller. I don't see him as a NFL quarterback. Now, there's a lot of supposedly NFL GMs, a lot of guys that say that they see him as that. I don't. I don't think he's I don't think he's ready for everything that Penn State has, for everything that the potential that Penn State could do. I don't see him as that guy to be able to lead an NFL franchise. Now, between this year and next year, he could completely prove me wrong. And I say that because I looked at Jalen Milroe last year, did not think Jalen Milroe was going to be any type of a decent quarterback. Completely proved me wrong this year. Definitely stepped up his pocket passing game, overall athlete, overall his just comfortableness in being a quarterback and being in the pocket really seemed to grow along with the rest of his confidence this year. So Jalen Milroe proved me wrong. Maybe Drew Aller will prove me wrong. But the last couple of years of what I've seen, I haven't necessarily been impressed. Now, what's funny is looking at this, and I kind of broke this down last week, and I even broke this down on another podcast, that Notre Dame had been known better all season for running the ball and stifling defense. They weren't really great at passing. All total, they had rushed for over 3,000 yards in the season so far. But funny enough, they did better at passing than Penn State, but Penn State did better at rushing than they did. Between Penn State with 2 of their running backs, with Nicholas Singleton and Katrin Allen, they both ran for 84 and 82 yards respectively. Tyler Warren, the absolute beast of a overall athlete and player for Penn State. Now he is going to absolutely be a top draft pick hands down, without a doubt. He's a senior, so he's going to be graduating. More likely, he's going to go in the NFL. He's going to be an absolute steal of a tight end for somebody. He, just by his statistics and kind of how he plays, how he's that gadget player, he's probably going to remind me a little bit of kind of like a Travis Kelce, maybe even like a George Kittle, some of the bigger, very athletic tight ends that we see now. It's like, man, they can kind of do everything, and it's another extension of being a wide receiver, because he had 2 carries for 21 yards each. 2 carries for 21 yards total, about 10.5 each, and then he had 6 receptions for 75 yards. Actually led the team in receptions. So this is a talented Penn State team. Don't get me wrong. But for the fact that Notre Dame was able to come in and win it. And then, of course, I see all the people complaining about how Notre Dame didn't have to play a conference game. They didn't have that extra game. They didn't have the extra timing. They're not as tired because they didn't have to play. They've still played 15 games. They've played 1 game less. In all honesty, if it proved anything between Ohio State and Notre Dame, your conference game really doesn't matter unless you're on the fringe of being able to get in or not. Now, if you're able to get in, doesn't really matter if you play for it or not. That's just an extra game, and it truly doesn't matter, because if anything, it could potentially be more detrimental, because that's either going to knock you down in the seed standings, ask SMU, or it's going to potentially give you a bye, which we found out at least this year the byes were more harm than they were good. But nonetheless, though, a really good game. Notre Dame ended up coming out with the last second field goals for the win. And Penn State at the end, just really weird play calling with how they decided to handle that. I didn't understand that at all. But that was just me personally anyway. But nonetheless, though, we are going to take one real quick break. When we come back, we will dive into Texas and Ohio State, that phenomenal matchup that ended up taking place, what maybe some of the repercussions may or may not be. And then after that, we'll get into our preview of the national title game. So when we come back.
Introducing LT Defense Tactical Gear, your ultimate solution for top-notch protection and performance in the field. Our armor bundles provide unmatched safety and comfort, while our battle belts and holsters ensure quick and easy access to your gear. Stay prepared for any situation with our high-quality medical supplies, designed to keep you ready for action at all times. Looking to enhance your skills? Our firearms training programs will take your proficiency to the next level. Trust LT Defense for all your tactical gear needs and gear up for success on the battlefield.
All right, welcome back into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping teach them how to podcast, and most importantly, letting their voices be heard. So we just talked about Penn State versus Notre Dame in the college football semifinals, how good of a game that ended up being. And then to follow it up the very next day, we ended up also having Texas versus Ohio State. That game was definitely more interesting. I think that was one that people were more excited to kind of see, who comes out of this as the overall winner, because Ohio State coming in extremely hot. They came in off of a dominant performance off of Oregon. They came in off of a dominant performance off of Tennessee. And so, now you've got basically the 2 big brands, 2 of the 4 top colleges that we had in the preseason poll as far as, who is potentially supposed to be the best. And when you looked at the preseason schedule, you could have put them in any order. You had Oregon, Texas, Georgia, and Ohio State as the top 4. They ended up being 2 of the 4 teams that ended up finishing overall. And throughout the entirety of this game, at no point when I watched this did I feel that Texas was in control. There's a couple times that, Texas is within striking distance. I think Texas has a chance to potentially come back. But Ohio State, once again, started out hot. They start out their very first, real close to their first drive. Quinshon Judkins with a 9-yard touchdown run. They go up 7-0 to almost end the half. Jaden Blue gets an 18-yard pass from Quinn Ewers, ends up tying it. Texas has a little bit of momentum. And then for whatever reason, TreVeyon Henderson said, "Here, hold my beer." And TreVeyon Henderson goes 75-yard pass from Will Howard for the touchdown to put Ohio State back up by 7 with 13 seconds left in the half. And so then for Texas, they're like, morale might be a little bit defeated as a result of that. Third quarter comes about. Texas gets the ball. They stop Ohio State from being able to score. Ohio State goes scoreless in the third quarter. But then Jaden Blue gets another touchdown pass from Quinn Ewers, so now it's tied up 14-14. Now, this is where, to me, again, it felt like Ohio State was more in control, but okay, now what's potentially going to teeter, one way or another. So to start the fourth quarter, Ohio State then takes the ball, goes all the way down. Quinshon Judkins 1 yard run for a touchdown. That was 13 plays, 88 yards, took almost 8 minutes to do. So basically, we're halfway through the fourth quarter at this point. So there's still time for Texas to potentially come back and potentially rally from this. Now, they were able to go all the way down to the goal line. And Ohio State's goal line defense, I'm not going to lie, when I was watching it, I'm thinking, okay, they're down at the goal line. There's going to be about 2 to 3 minutes left. If I'm Ohio State, maybe let them score. So that way, okay, it's close, but then you have enough time. You can drive down the field and at least put yourself in position for a game-winning field goal. And gentleman by the name of Captain Jack Sawyer, number 33 defensive end for Ohio State, took that personally and ends up actually causing the sack strip fumble on Quinn Ewers and returns at 83 yards for what essentially ended up being the game-sealing touchdown for Ohio State to go up 28-14 and propel the Buckeyes into the national championship versus Notre Dame. That game was probably one of the best because, again, you never felt Texas was truly in control. Now, maybe some Texas fans probably disagree with me, but when I was watching it, I never felt that there was a chance that, okay, Texas is really taking control of this. It always felt this is Ohio State's dance, this is Ohio State's game until they just decide that it's not. And it really left me with a lot of questions because when I first looked at this matchup, I thought, okay, it's Texas versus Ohio State. Ohio State's coming in hot. If there's any other team that's left out there that could potentially give Ohio State the biggest run for their money, it would have to be Texas just purely based off of their talent on paper and the capability that they have. Now, obviously, that ended up not coming to fruition, obviously. But I thought, okay, if Texas can kind of get out of their way of their own ego, I think that they have a real shot on. They could potentially go in, at least keep it close, and they did all the way up until the end. But I thought for sure Texas would be able to say, okay, we're going to be able to kind of punch you back. You're not really expecting it. And when we want to be able to really make you think about it and really make you kind of stumble and backtrack on yourself. But nonetheless, though, a fantastic game. And now we have our national title game set between Ohio State and Notre Dame both. Now, keep in mind, this game is next week. It's next Monday. We have a plethora of things going on next Monday. We have MLK Day, we have the inauguration, and we have the national title game all on the same day, all within just a few hours of each other. And as it stands right now, on January 14th at about 6:22 in the evening, Ohio State opening is a 9.5-point favorite. The spread is Ohio State by 8, and ESPN's matchup predictor has Ohio State a 55.4% chance of winning over Notre Dame. They only give them about a 45% chance to win. So they still think it'll be close. Now, I do think with this game, with how Notre Dame plays against Ohio State, I think they have a chance. Now, I did say this against Tennessee. I thought initially with how Tennessee might approach the game plan of they had a really good runner in Sampson. They had a pretty good offensive line, pretty good defensive line. I thought that they might look at even just a couple weeks before against the Michigan game of can we control the line of scrimmage? Can we run the ball in Ohio State? And can we make Ohio State struggle in the fact of we're going to eat up the clock. We're going to cause a lot of long drives. We're going to let our defense rest. And then when our defense is out there, it's going to force them to struggle as far as being able to move the ball goes. And that ended up not being the case at all with Tennessee. Ohio State came out with the exact opposite. Now, I think, would Notre Dame potentially try that as well? Maybe because of how they're built. I don't think that they're built for a potential high-scoring shootout game. I think if it does end up becoming a shootout, it's going to be Ohio State's to absolutely run away with. And who knows, that might end up being what people end up complaining about, the fact of well, it's Ohio State versus Notre Dame. Notre Dame shouldn't have been in, even though they have quality wins against Georgia and Penn State both. But people would still probably argue that Notre Dame didn't deserve to be in there. Sorry, I am still getting over being sick, so I have a little bit of a dry throat and a little bit of cough. I'm trying not to do that for everybody to hear because nobody wants to hear that. But nonetheless, though, I do wonder with how Ohio State has approached a lot of things here of lately. And I had a theory, and a lot of people may think that I'm nuts for this because they may think, no, that's not actually true. Who would ever do that? I had a theory that kind of at the beginning of the year, when Ohio State looked at their schedule and they saw, okay, here's who we have to face. Their toughest opponents that they're going to have to face this year was going to be Oregon, it was going to be Penn State, it was going to be Michigan, in that order. And for Ohio State, when they were looking at that, they said, okay, who are we most likely to have to face again in this season, especially when it comes to the Big Ten Championship? And then more than likely, whoever was not only in the Big Ten Championship, the runner-up was more than likely going to also make it into the playoffs. And I even said that long before the playoff seeding was even, formatted and whatnot. I thought, okay, whoever is contending for the Big Ten, whoever's contending for the SEC, and then depending on how well the other conferences do, whoever wins the Big 12 or the ACC or whatnot, the contender and then potentially the runner-up is probably going to be able to be in the playoffs. And it ended up being true for the Big Ten and the SEC and whatnot, because obviously Texas and Georgia made it, Oregon and Penn State made it. To me, I think Ohio State looked at this and said, look, we're probably going to have to face one of these teams again. And if we do we want to potentially put all of the cards out right now at the beginning of the season when it's still early, because we're probably going to have to face them again, and then it's going to be more of a struggle. To me, I think Ohio State, when they played Oregon the first time, they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We are going to make a very kind of generic game plan. We're not going to put everything out there, but we are going to try to still do our best to win. But this is what we're going to do with our personnel. We're going to see what Oregon does. We're going to see what they give us. If we win, cool. If not, we're not necessarily worried because we're confident in ourselves. We're not going to lose it. We're not going to lose that many more games in order to potentially cost ourselves the playoffs. Now, I think Ohio State was more set on they were going to beat Michigan and then at least be in the Big Ten Championship and then potentially run the gauntlet from there. But I think overall this ended up working out better for them because they were shocked by Michigan. And I think as a result, Ohio State, I think, went back to the drawing board and said, okay, look, we need to revamp this. We need to change what we're doing. We need to start pulling out stuff that we didn't do before. And I truly think that's how Ohio State has decided to approach this when it comes to playoffs. Of everything that we did in the regular season is going to get thrown out the window, and we're going to do something completely different. We are going to come in a completely and totally different football team. And I think that has truly paid dividends for the Buckeyes as they sit here, competing for a national title again. So to me, I think Ohio State should be favored in this. Don't get me wrong. I like the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, being from Indiana. My dad was a huge Notre Dame fan, so I've always had a soft spot for the Irish. But I do wonder, overall talent-wise and matchup-wise, how well can they stack up against the Buckeyes? Can they stop Travion Henderson? Can they stop Quinshon Judkins? Will Howard is actually playing better than I ever thought that he would. And believe it or not, the one guy that you would think in the last two games, he was absolutely a monster, and he was shut down almost non-existent in the Texas game, and that was Jeremiah Smith. He only had one reception for 3 yards in that game, and Texas completely shut him down. Now there's Sam brought up a good theory of maybe Ohio State kind of used him as a decoy of, we'll let Texas think that he's covered, they can put 3 guys on him, but then we're going to utilize somebody different. And I think that is very possible. Like I said, I think Ohio State, after the Michigan loss and even at the beginning of the year, said, okay, this is what we're going to roll with. We're going to try to win as many games as we can. This is what we're going to do. And until somebody stops it, we'll go from there. I think once Michigan stopped it, I think that's when Ohio State went back to the drawing board and said, no, we need to fix this. We need to do something different. And now it's a totally different team. I think it's possible they did that. I think they've already accounted for the fact that people are going to be more aware of Jeremiah Smith, and I think they're going to be aware of the fact that he is a massive impact to the game and how much of a game changer he can be when he gets the hot hands and when he gets going. So I think Ohio State is more than likely going to be prepared again. Talent-wise, I think they're going to be all right. Overall health and roster-wise, Ohio State's a little bit healthier than Notre Dame. Now, don't get it twisted. I still think Notre Dame has a lot of really good players, and I still think they have a fantastic run game. But I still have a lot of questions on Riley Leonard. Once they shut down that pocket, that rolling out of the pocket, that escapability and whatnot that Leonard likes to do, I don't know how well Notre Dame's going to be able to rally back with traditional. We'll talk about the NFL first round playoffs and whatnot, how those games ended up being decided, and then we'll talk a little bit about what I think the Colts need to do as far as the future goes and whatnot, because I think there's a lot of potential, but there's a lot of growth that the Colts need to do too. So we'll take a quick commercial break, and when we come back.
Sacred flowers, sacred mother, earth is crying for her daughters. Sacred flowers, sacred mother, earth is crying for her daughters. Where have you gone? Who took them from us? Who stole them from us? Sacred flowers. Crying for her daughters. Sacred flowers, sacred mother, earth is crying for her daughters. Life on the res, bringing light to our lives. You are missing your mist. Sacred flowers.
All right, welcome back in, everyone, to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping teach them how to podcast, and most importantly, letting their voices be heard. So for anybody who is interested in wondering, that was Sacred Flowers by Blue Mountain Tribe, a wonderful Native American band who, again, they really advocate for missing and murdered Native Americans. So if you potentially have any tips or anything that you would like to share, to potentially help them, please look back. There is a phone number on there that you can reach out to contact to help them. But fantastic song nonetheless, though. So we are back to talk a little bit about the NFL's first round playoffs that happened. Overall, there's a little bit of some surprises. Three that I can think of as far as surprises go. No, yes, I was not expecting at all. Probably the first one we had the Chargers going to Houston to take on the Texans. The Texans put an absolute thumping on the Chargers. Justin Herbert had a fantastic season all year. He threw 3 interceptions all year, 23 touchdowns, just shy of 4,000 yards under the first year of Jim Harbaugh and whatnot. And then in this game, he throws 4 picks to that Houston Texans defense, played pretty awful. Now, Ladd McConkey, 9 receptions, 197 yards, and a touchdown in a playoff game. So what a way for him to come back. But then for the Texans, CJ Stroud and whatnot, it seemed like they kind of came back, settled into their own a little bit. CJ Stroud, not exactly the greatest performance. He's 22-33, just under 300 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. But Joe Mixon really showed up. 25 carries, 106 yards, a touchdown. Nico Collins, 7 receptions for 122 yards and a touchdown. So you had 2 really prolific wide receivers. Were just about the only 2 highlights out of this whole entire game and whatnot for them to come through. But really surprised that the Chargers kind of fell apart in the way that they did. I expected them to do significantly better than what they did, but for the fact that they completely got blown out by Houston was really a bit of a surprise. Then you also had the Bills and the Broncos. Not really too surprised on this. Kind of expected for this to go pretty bad. You had a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix, who all in all played really well in that game. 13-22, 144 yards and a touchdown in his first playoff game in what is honestly a really successful season for Denver. That's the first time they've been to the playoffs since 2015 with Peyton and when they won the Super Bowl. So obviously Bo Nix is going to be the guy in Denver for quite a long time until he gives them a reason not to be. But nonetheless, though, Buffalo seems to have captured some type of magic in a jar. Josh Allen was 20-26, 272 yards, 2 touchdowns. James Cook, 23 carries, 120 yards and a touchdown. And then Curtis Samuel being their lead receiver with 3 receptions, 68 yards and a touchdown as well. Buffalo just continuing to show that they seem to be like a team of destiny and that they're going to absolutely keep rolling. Now, they're going to need that because they're going to end up actually having to face the Baltimore Ravens in the next round. But nonetheless, not really surprised that they beat the Broncos as bad as they did. And then the final matchup in the AFC this past wildcard weekend, we had the Steelers go to Baltimore to take on the Ravens. So we had Ravens versus Steelers part 3 again. The Ravens end up ultimately coming away with a victory, 28-14. The bad part is for all the people that say that Russell Wilson is washed. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not going to sit here. This isn't going to be a defend Russell Wilson to no end type show. The dude went 20-29, 270 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, as far as being a quarterback, as far as doing everything he needs to do, that's about as good as you get. Now, albeit, those were pretty much just garbage time points because they didn't happen until the third quarter. They cut it close. It was 7-21. Baltimore and Derrick Henry ends up responding. It goes 7-28. And then at the end of the third, they score another touchdown to at least keep it close. And then that was the last point scored of the game for either side. That's really not bad. Now, you can blame Pittsburgh for, Najee Harris, 6 carries, 17 yards. Jalen Warren, 2 carries for 6 yards. And then Russell Wilson, 3 carries for 6 yards as well. They had under 30 yards of rushing for the entire game. Meanwhile, Baltimore was 1 yard shy of 300 yards rushing on that one. So you can really blame that. And I know a lot of people are calling for Mike Tomlin's job and the fact of, that's, I believe they said 6 straight first round playoff losses for Pittsburgh. And then it didn't help that they finished the season with 4 straight losses as well. You know, they lost to the Eagles, they lost to the Ravens earlier, then they lost to the Chiefs, and then they lost to the Bengals. So they finished the year really, really poorly as compared to when they first started. But nonetheless, though, I mean, again, not making this a defend Russell Wilson, but that's about as good as you can ask for considering he's an older guy. It's Arthur Smith's system. It's his first time ever being in that system. He's got Mike Tomlin as a head coach. So that's a little bit of a, I'm not going to say a challenge within itself, but it's a different culture. It's a different type of way that they play. It'll be interesting to see if they bring Russ back or not. It'll be interesting to see if they even bring back Justin or not. Hi, Mike. I appreciate that, buddy. Because I think Justin did well enough to potentially earn his job there. I mean, he went 4-2, before they decided to hand the ball over to Russ. Now, a lot of people would say, well, he kind of did, Russ has a little bit more of a proven track record. Fields is kind of having to rebound and rehab from all the years with Chicago under, Matt Nagy, under, not Matt Nagy, under Matt Eberflus and whatnot. So there's a lot that they're having to work with as far as kind of rehabilitating Justin Fields. But I think he did enough to potentially stay there in Pittsburgh. And again, it's one of those, when you look at free agency, when you look at where Pittsburgh is going to be in the draft, I don't really see anybody that you could bring in and say, I think this guy could potentially be the starter to at least make us competitive for the playoffs. So I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if maybe they don't bring both of these guys back. I've even seen reports and rumors that Mike Tomlin's job might even be in potential up in the air. And I'm thinking it's kind of insane the fact that this man has never had a losing season when he's with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they're thinking about getting rid of him. Now, again, I get it because he hasn't had a lot of deep playoff success. He hasn't had a lot of deep playoff runs. You got to think of how long he's been coaching, who he's had to go up against. The first time he wins the Super Bowl, that was a lot of Bill Cowher's Super Bowl roster that he built with Big Ben, Hines Ward, and all of them. So he inherited a really good team to basically just take it and run with it. He didn't really have to build anything. Now, as the years kind of grew on, as he had to replace a lot of those players, now he's built a lot of really good teams. You have to think at one point the Sears wide receiver room was Mike Wallace, Emmanuel Sanders, and Antonio Brown. Fantastic. And you had Le'Veon Bell to top it all off. Okay, Sports. I appreciate that, Amber. Amber's one of the hosts here on MBR on the Into the Weeds podcast. So if you ever want to hear really cool stuff as far as interviews from people, if you want to hear, I think they dabble a little bit in like the supernatural as far as like ghost stories, maybe even some true crime for all my fellow psychopaths out there that like, documentaries and whatnot and stories on serial killers. I think it's cool. They cover into that. So definitely give her a shout out. Definitely give her a look into if that's something that you're checking out. Her and her daughter both do it, and they're both absolutely fantastic. But I do wonder though about Mike Tomlin's overall, what does his future look like because of it seems like his ability to spot talent, but his inability to guide that talent into its best potential form that they could have. Now let's move on to the NFC side. A little bit more of some upsets on the NFC side than we did on the AFC. The Eagles and the Packers. Eagles beat the Packers 22-10. There is a little bit of worry there with Philly because yes, they beat them, but at one point it was 16-10. A lot of the Packers star players ended up going out. Jordan Love struggled. He threw 3 interceptions that game. And the fact that they were able to keep it that close, you have A.J. Brown reading a book on the sideline, kind of showing, I know a lot of people are kind of really criticizing him, showing that he doesn't care. And, some people are going to be defensive of him and really fire back on that. Here's my argument. Like, look, I get it if you guys aren't necessarily worried about this, and not saying that you have to go off for, 150, 200 yards, nothing like that. But you still need to take this seriously. This is just one game out of the potential 3 that you're going to play. No, 4. Sorry, I can't math very well. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4. Potentially 1 out of 4 that you're playing as far as potentially going and winning another Super Bowl goes. And the fact that you're sitting there on the sidelines reading the book, and he came out and said that, well, I read the book all the time. It's just this is the first time. It's like, no, dude, you're getting paid millions of dollars. Your team is struggling. Even Nick Sirianni came out and said, hey, there's no victory Monday for us. There is a lot that we absolutely have to fix. There's a lot that we have to do to get ready for the next game. And they're going to end up having to host the Rams, and they're 6.5-point favorites in that. But there is a lot that they have to do, because I think overall talent-wise, Philly has a lot of deep talent and could potentially make a lot of deep runs. But you can't do that by having one of your star wide receivers sitting there on the sidelines reading a book. Now, is there a whole lot that he can do? Not really. Ultimately, it's up to the offensive coordinator, it's up to the coach, and it's up to your players. But that's not the leadership role that you want to see out of a star wide receiver that you're paying quite a big chunk of money to. Probably the two upsets, though, you had the Buccaneers end up getting upset by the Commanders. Jaden Daniels and Washington come in, beat the Buccaneers 23-20. Jaden Daniels, about as good as a game as you could ask. He's 24-35, 268 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 36 yards on the ground as well. He was Washington's leading rusher, as he has been all season. And Baker Mayfield played about as well as you can ask. He's 15-18, 185 yards, 2 touchdowns. Bucky Irving, 17 carries, 77 yards. So this was really a close game that I think was as entertaining as it overall could be. It was a 10-10 tie at half, and it just kept continuing to be that until Washington was able to go down and kick the game-winning field goal to ultimately win it. But nonetheless, though, probably the biggest surprise, because I did not have Washington going into Tampa Bay and being able to beat the Buccaneers, especially when it seemed like Tampa Bay came off of that New Orleans Saints win, with Mike Evans being able to get his 11th straight 1,000-yard season and whatnot. I felt, okay, this is going to be a lot closer, and just ended up not being at all. In the game that I'm not really going to go super deep into. I might a little bit as I talk about the Colts and whatnot. The Vikings get destroyed by the Rams 9-27. It was 24-3 at the half. So the Rams just really stopped trying in the second half of the game. But nonetheless, though, this was just a really ugly game. It kind of said a lot about Sam Darnold as far as if he's potentially still going to be a big free agent market this coming offseason and whatnot. What does Minnesota do with the quarterback position and whatnot? Do they keep JJ? Do they keep Sam? They still have Daniel Jones on the roster. Wouldn't recommend the Daniel Jones option, but that route is potentially there if that's what they want to take. But interesting nonetheless that they were, super highly touted. There's a lot of talk of potentially reseeding the playoffs because of them, because they were 14-3. And then they go in and lose to the Rams. But, it was still interesting just to see that happen. But we are going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll come back to talk about the Colts and whatnot. What I think they need to do. A little bit more bright.
Tune in to Clado's Cacophony of Sound every Saturday night from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern on Military Broadcast Radio at mbradio.us or on Twitch at DJ_Clado. MBR, giving veterans a voice.
All right, welcome back in, everyone, to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you in part by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping teach them how to podcast, and most importantly, letting their voices be heard. So we are back to talk about some of the Colts and some of the woes that they have and some of the issues that the Colts have. And I kind of brushed on this a little bit last week, but I was kind of all in a jumble, having to have some technical issues, help people out and whatnot, get pulled away from the show for a little bit. I'll be honest, personally, as one of the, a lot of people say that you're your own worst critic. I was a super hard critic of myself. Last week was not happy with my show about how it ended up turning out. So I wanted to kind of break down what I think the Colts should do as far as their future goes, what I think the future looks like for the Indianapolis Colts overall. So close. to winning the division. They were close in almost every single game that they played this year. The only game that they weren't close in, well, technically 3, if you want to get real technical about it. They did get absolutely blown out by the Lions. They did lose by 10 to the Bills. They lost by 18 to the Broncos. Now, that one I don't necessarily count as much because they were actually up in that game up until the Jonathan Taylor fumble right at the 1-yard line and actually fell into the end zone for a touchback to Denver's benefit. But then the defense for the Colts also absolutely crumbled in that. They lose to the Giants 45-33, which was nuts, by the way. And yeah, that was some of their closest games as far as their losses go. Now, everything else was by a 1 score or less. And when you look at the division that they're in with the AFC South, the Texans are still going to be there. They're gonna have a lot of contention and whatnot that they have to go through. I think Jacksonville's definitely regressed quite a bit. I think Tennessee is still rebuilding. So there's a lot of opportunity for this Colts team to really capitalize. But there's also a lot of questions that I have for this Colts team as far as what do you do moving forward, and we're gonna address the toughest part of that a little bit later. I do think the offensive line needs to be fine-tuned a little bit. I think that the potential is there. I think that they have a lot of money invested in the O-line, which is good because if you look at a team, as much as I love the Bears do not put a lot of money into their offensive line. And it shows because Caleb Williams was sacked 68 times. 4 shy of what the 85 Bears did was 72 sacks in a single season. That's what Caleb Williams was having to deal with. So Indy at least has the benefit of having a pretty decent offensive line. I think they need depth. I think they need, I would say a couple more pieces. Again, they don't necessarily need an absolute star. I mean, those always help, but they could get away with having a guy that's probably a pretty good depth player, maybe even their 2nd or 3rd round guy, for the team to really be able to make that work. So that's the offense. Defense, they've already at least started one thing that they needed to fix. They needed to get rid of Gus Bradley. Now, a lot of people were saying because Gus Bradley, technically his contract expired, they let Gus Bradley walk. That was something that was long overdue. He needed to actually be fired last year because a lot of what the Colts had last year was the same exact issues that they had this year. Their defense could keep them in the game, and they absolutely gave up massive leads that ended up costing them overall. And that trend continued into this year, and they finally, quote unquote, let him walk. They have been looking for they should have been looking for a new defensive coordinator for a long time. If I was Shane Steichen, I would have potentially fired him. I know it was kind of late in the season. I would have fired him as soon as the Broncos game was over, because that one was really that determining factor of they were up, they had a chance at the time. They were sitting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They were sitting at 6 and 7, so their playoff hopes were not completely dashed. And they had just come out of the bye week, and they had an emotional win against New England. They were able to go down and get the win. This was kind of the on and off time with Flacco and then Richardson kind of getting hurt again. Flacco stepping back in. So it was kind of a really weird, awkward time with the Colts and the quarterback situation and whatnot. So it's like, okay, they have a little bit of momentum. They could potentially run away and work with this. And the defense ultimately gives it up to Denver. And now they're kind of having to hope that other teams lose out. And really the only thing they had to do to potentially keep their playoff hopes alive, they had to beat New York, and they ultimately ended up losing New York in a pretty embarrassing fashion. And then Anthony Richardson doesn't even play the last 2 games of the season. He ends up basically getting shut down after the game against Tennessee. So to me, the defensive coordinator is one thing they need to fix. There's supposedly rumors that they're going to be looking at Wink Martindale, former Ravens and Giants defensive coordinator who went to Michigan this past season. Did not do great for Michigan. So I'm not going to say I would be hesitant, but even if you look at his time with the Giants, the Giants defense had a lot of star pieces on it, and they weren't exactly the most fearsome. Now, again, the Giants had the same issue of their offense was extremely poor. Even with Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, they were still pretty poor. So I would be hesitant, but Would it be an upgrade over Gus Bradley? I would think so. But I think the offense is really where the Colts have to work. So to me, the last two things that I think the Colts 100% need to do, the first thing to me, they need to get a number one wide receiver. Now, looking at the numbers as far as how all these guys have done, Alec Pierce probably had the absolute best numbers out of all the wide receivers, both with his yardage and his touchdown numbers. He had 824 receiving yards. He had 7 touchdowns on the season. So, I mean, he had, fairly good numbers for considering he, kind of he is a bigger guy. It's his second year now. Yeah, year 2 going into year 3. He was picked in 2022. So, he definitely grew from his rookie year so far. So he's probably the best, but again, I wouldn't necessarily put him as my number one wide receiver on this Colts team. The guy that I think that they want to keep naming as a number one, and everybody keeps arguing with me as a number one, is Michael Pittman. I'm going to say this about Michael Pittman because I've never been a huge fan of his. And I think for me, what really got me was when they traded for Carson Wentz and he came, and typically, sometimes you'll have guys that have been on the team for a minute. And when you have a veteran come in, they're like, hey, can I get my number? Do I have to pay you for it? Do I have to just pay a charity? Do you want to like contest? What do you want to potentially do for me to be able to get your number? And don't get me wrong, it's not like Carson Wentz is some, great veteran that has been around forever and he's, built his legacy off of being number 11 or anything like that. Michael Pittman hadn't. He never worn number 11 before until he came to the Colts. Just wanted to argue it like, oh no, I'm number 11 now. This is what I'm going to build my legacy with. And it was weird how he made this argument. But he's been with the Colts since 2020. He's a second round pick. He's had 5 years to be the number one option for the Colts. And albeit he's had a rotating door of quarterbacks in the process with that, he hasn't established himself. And I say that because everybody's going to argue, oh, he's had a rotating door of quarterbacks. Mike Evans has done it because Mike Evans had a rotating door of quarterbacks for a long time. He's done it for 11 seasons. He's had over 1,000 yards, multiple touchdowns and whatnot. Terry McLaurin has done it. DeAndre Hopkins has done it. We've seen big name wide receivers not have consistent quarterbacks, and they still give consistent results as the number one guy. And I don't feel Michael Pittman is that guy. So to me, if I'm the Colts, you have to go get a number one wide receiver. Now, I think Downs is doing pretty well. He had 803 yards, considering this was his, this is his like first official. No, this is his second year. Sorry. This is also his first year. Yeah, his first year. 803 yards, 5 touchdowns. So not necessarily terrible. But nonetheless, though, there is a little bit of a question there. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be the guy. And then you had Donnie Mitchell, who for sure it was his rookie year out of Texas. Second round pick. He had 312 yards. He didn't have any touchdowns, but I know he was kind of injured throughout a good part of the season and whatnot, and they really didn't utilize him the way that they should have. Just looking at his last 5 games, Tennessee was probably his best. He had 1 reception, 1 target for 36 yards. And that was his longest play in the last 5 games at least. So I don't know if they figured out how to necessarily use him yet, but that's something that they need to do. And then last thing real quick before we go, I think they need to figure out the quarterback situation. Like I've talked about Anthony Richardson before, he's a very athletic guy. He's got a big arm. If it's anything over 50 yards down the field, he's going to throw it and he's going to hit him right in the numbers for whatever reason. And it's going to be great. You can't take deep shots every single time because eventually defenses are going to learn how to cover that and you're not going to be able to do it. Joe Flacco's not the guy either. Joe Flacco's in his 40s. I think when he filled in for Cleveland, he was fine. Then he comes in Indianapolis. He's not really able to capture that same magic because, again, I don't know what the Colts are doing offensively. That makes me kind of question Zane Steichen a lot of bit and whether he's calling the plays or whoever the offensive coordinator is, on top of the defense having mistakes. But I think the Colts need to go out and try to find a quarterback. Now, again, the Colts are in the same situation of they're kind of too high to have to really, get one of those top quarterbacks. And again, free agency wise, who are they going to potentially get? There's a lot of talks they may or may not go try to get Sam Darnold. I don't necessarily know if he's worth that kind of money, especially this playoff performance. But I think the Colts definitely need a quarterback upgrade. Now, again, if it's me, do I almost say tank this coming season? See if Arch Manning is potentially available, or maybe like one of these other guys, or maybe, you continue to sign a bridge guy until you think, okay, here's a guy that we think coming out of college is going to be the guy for our franchise. Who knows? Maybe Arch Manning to the Colts would potentially be a story because, Peyton's nephew comes in. Maybe he can try to live up to quote unquote Peyton standards and whatnot that people always try to portray for young quarterbacks. I don't know. But nonetheless, though, Colts have a lot of work they have to do in order to keep the future bright. But appreciate everybody tuning in. Appreciate everybody listening. I'll be back next week to talk about the results of the national title game and the next round of the NFL playoffs. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. Everybody have a good week. Everybody have a good night. And we will see y'all later.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.